Welcome back to another episode of Free the Plant, Free the People, presented by BluRok Farms. And also, we have a partnership with LeafWell. So if you want to get a discount on your medical cannabis card, feel free to use the code BluRockFarm10 at leafwell.com. As well, if you live in the state of New Mexico, use our code as well, and it will get you where you can get a cannabis card for $75. So, as you know, welcome back to another episode of Free the Plant, Free the People, presented by BluRok Farms, like I stated. This is the podcast where we break down everything you need to know about the world of cannabis, from cultivation to industry insights to social issues that are going to impact your community. And today is going to be a very interesting topic. It's something that's been on everybody's mind. If you turn on your TV, if you just listen to people talking in conversation, it's all politics, 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 the election, and the presidential election. So that is going to be the topic that we're going to talk to today. But as you know, we're always going to look at it from a specific lens, and that lens is looking at it through the eye of how this election will affect the cannabis industry specifically. So before we get into the in-depth conversation about this, let's go into and talk about the two major candidates that are in this race. You have Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. You also have Joe Stein, who's running with the Green Party for a third party, which is the Green Party, and then you have Cornel West as well, who's running as an independent. So I would say those are the top four candidates in this year's election. But let's focus on the two main, the Republican and Democratic nomination for the president. And so we're going to talk about and analyze both of their records when it comes to their records, their statements, their potential policies that all revolve around cannabis and the industry, as well as we're going to also be focusing on criminal justice reform and economic opportunities because, as you know, here at Free the Plant, Free the Plant, Free the People. Our focus is on the BIPOC community and women. We want to get more of them into the industry, and so that's why we're going to be focusing on these specific sections of the cannabis industry today, and how those candidates might be affecting those situations. So. And the other reason why we want to focus on that community, specifically the BIPOC community, we know that that community has been the most devastated by the war on drugs, which has tons of black and brown people convicted for these types of charges as a result of the war on drugs. So, which also inhibits their ability to become entrepreneurs in the states where cannabis is becoming legalized and decriminalized. So I want to really first start with a side-by-side comparison and focusing on criminal justice reform and cannabis. So I'm going to start with Kamala Harris and expand on the background and expand on her background in cannabis convictions. Excuse me, I'm a little tongue-tied, a lot of C's in there, cannabis convictions. But she was once Attorney General. Excuse me, again, I cannot talk. She was once formerly Attorney General with a record on cannabis. During her tenure as California Attorney General, from 2011 to 2017, her office oversaw a lot of cannabis-related convictions. Now, when you listen to the media, the number of it sounds like it's a lot, but when you really break down the numbers of the convictions, you see that it was really 45. It was 45 cannabis convictions in that period of 6 years. To me, that's not a lot, but I guess a lot is up to your preference and your what you consider. In that time frame, I don't consider that a lot, especially when it was still illegal at that point. Now, what I will say in that her opinion has shifted somewhat, or her stance has shifted on that, where she used to be a little bit more tougher on crimes, especially cannabis conviction crimes. But from my understanding, because I was living in California at the time, is that she seemed like she was focusing on cannabis convictions that were also paired with violent crimes, as well as anything that involved sexual trafficking or things of that nature, because that's something that she was heavily focused on and was looking into a lot. So there is that as something to bring into account, as well as the fact that in California there is no, I don't even say California, nationwide, is disproportionately the conviction rates for Black and brown people are disproportionately higher, and their sentences are disproportionately longer than white counterparts that are arrested with similar conviction or similar cases. So that is something to keep in mind. But I would say again, like I said, when you look at the number of 45 in that 6 year period, that doesn't seem like a lot to me. But again, that's my personal opinion. Now let's talk about the different racial social groups specifically that were impacted in California, such as the American Civil Libertarian Union revolved around Black Californians and were 4 more times likely to be arrested for cannabis convictions versus their white counterparts. So that is something we also have to take into account into how Californians were being charged for those crimes under her watch. So I just again want to keep it clear about that as well. Now I do want to say that her office did take, from my estimation, take steps into trying to reduce that once cannabis became legalized. But now let's shift our view to when she was in the Senate, and as a U.S. senator, her position evolved even more in regards to cannabis and the legalization of it. She eventually became a strong advocate for cannabis decriminalization and criminal justice reform, which to me is important to see, because I say all the time that, yeah, I'm very convicted in the values and principles that I believe in. But if new information comes that changes that information, so will my opinion change. So I take it and I look at it as that. She was given more information about this specific topic, and so for her opinion changed on it. So that is kind of my take on it. She did also sponsor the Marijuana Justice Act and the MORE Act, which were very instrumental in California's decriminalization of cannabis and how it affected communities that look like mine and the BIPOC communities in regards to the war on drugs. So I think that is important that we mention and identify. So that's where my kind of brief side-by-side or viewpoint on Vice President Harris's stances, policies, and potential with cannabis, and how she evolved from her stance of being more strict on cannabis to being more open to the idea, decriminalizing it, providing pathways for entrepreneurship and expungements, which are needed in this space. And for those that are interested in being entrepreneurs in this space, that's the kind of leadership that I believe that we would need in order to be more productive and increase the numbers of Black entrepreneurships in the space. Because right now, I believe it's at about 8% is Black entrepreneurs in the space. And to me, that number should be a lot higher, especially when you look at the number of people that have been convicted of cannabis charges in the Black and brown community. That number is a lot more than 8%, I'll tell you that. So if that number is a lot higher than 8%, we should increase that 8% in the entrepreneurship as well, and ownership. That is very key. I'm not against having Black and brown people as workers in the cannabis space, but I want more than just us being workers. I want us to be owners as well. So let's now go into and talk about Donald Trump's stance on cannabis, and we're going to be specifically talking about the First Steps Act as well as his stance on criminal justice reform. So during Donald Trump's presidency, the First Act was implemented, and he signed off on it, which a lot of people tend to give him credit for, and I'm not taking it away. He did sign it. That is important that he did, and he should be given credit for signing that act into action. But he should also not given credit for the things that he didn't do. just like I mentioned with Vice President Harris, I did not give her credit for for writing the Marijuana Justice Act or the MORE Act. I stated that she was a strong advocate for it and that she was a sponsor for those two specific bills. So if you listen to media, they give you the indication that he was the proponent, he wrote the bill, all these things, that he was the advocate that really was in the forefront of the First Step Act, which he wasn't. So let's get into the details about how the First Step Act was implemented or was began and who wrote it and things of that nature. First, let's go into what the First Step Act is for. It's a part of a criminal justice reform bill, and the actual full name of it is the Formerly Incarcerated Reentry Society Transform Safety Transition Every Person Act. That's why they call it the First Steps Act, because that's a very long ass name. But Donald Trump did sign it into law on December 21st, 2018. So again, I give him credit for that, and I think that that act has been beneficial for the black community, particularly. So I like to give credit where credit is due. But this legislation was a product of bipartisan efforts to address the issue of criminal justice reform, or the criminal justice system specifically. And the whole point of this bill, this act, was to reduce sentencing for nonviolent drug offenses. So like cannabis, specifically in mind. I want you to keep that in the forefront of your mind as we're going through this. And offering rehabilitation programs to reduce recidivism. We don't want people leaving jails, prisons for like I just stated, for low or nonviolent acts, and then just returning for the same type of crime because of their circumstances, as well as other potential addiction and mental aspects that might be adding to this recidivism. So the act was to provide resources in those ways to decrease the recidivism, as well as kind of fight the war on drugs in essence. And to a certain degree, it wasn't quite to that specific aspect of stating the war on drugs, but some of the benefits of this act would be felt by those that were impacted by the war on drugs. The key advocates of and the architecture of the First Step Acts need to be mentioned to me. Senator Chuck Grassley, he's a Republican in Iowa, and Senator Dick Durbin, which is a Democratic Republican. A Democratic senator in Illinois. So those two senators again were really responsible and championed this bill, this act. And that shows the bipartisan aspect of it. And that's why we should be leaning more into bipartisan acts, because it's going to affect a lot more people if we can get both parties to agree on such things as this. The other thing that I do want to add into this aspect is Van Jones. Me and Van Jones don't always agree on a lot of things, but we'll leave that there. But he is a criminal justice advocate, and he did play an influential role in moving this First Step Act along, helping alongside with other organizations like the ACLU, which we mentioned, Cut 50, and the Freedom Works. So all of those people helped push this bill or this act into law, and then Trump did eventually sign it. Now, what I will say is, while the first act was not cannabis specific, as I kind of alluded to earlier, but it does, because if those cannabis convictions were nonviolent, they would fall into this act. So like I said, it indirectly does help cannabis-related convictions, and they can be benefited from this reform. So that is what I'll say about that. Now, looking at both candidates in that regard. And I'll say, actually, before I go to looking at both candidates, just to wrap up the first act part, I do think it was somewhat meaningful step forward in criminal justice reform. It's not to the degree at which it needs to be done. A lot more needs to be done. I really wish we can get... oh my God, the name is escaping me right now. the senator that he passed away during COVID, and he was trying to pass a large criminal justice reform bill that wasn't able, still is not able to be pushed. But I would like to see that bill get John Lewis. There we go. Popped in my head. I was like, it just escaped me. Sorry. John Lewis. I would hope that the bill that he was instrumental in would be able to eventually come into pass. Those are those two candidates' stances on cannabis, at least from the research that I found. Please let me know in the comments if you found any more information related to that, or that the information that I found was wrong. Yeah. All the information that I got was from credible sources. So please, if it's wrong, please correct me. I have no problem being corrected on those issues. I want to be factual. So now I want to dive into the economic side of Vice President Harris. And the cannabis industry is a major economic driver, and it's going to be and will continue to be a major economic driver as legalization continues to move forward. Both of them have brought into account their influence on the economic landscape, and I want to touch on how what they provided to us about their economic landscape and how that's going to affect cannabis businesses, or how I see that it might affect cannabis businesses. Specifically with Vice President Harris, she, in the debate that she had against Donald Trump, and then as she's been promoting lately, has talked about supporting small businesses. She's talking about supporting small businesses in general. I think one of her acts would be giving $50,000 to small businesses to help their businesses flourish. So if cannabis gets decriminalized and you're an entrepreneur and you don't have quite the funds to start a full-fledged, large-scale operation, you would fall into that category of small business. You would then potentially be able to use those funds, the $50,000 I believe it is, for that for your business to begin. So that's something to keep in mind. But going back to the MORE Act, in that it included provisions to support businesses owned by people from the communities harmed by the war on drugs. So it has a specific link to cannabis, with grants and funding aiming to help people enter into the cannabis space. And specifically Black and BIPOC, Black and brown people and the BIPOC community, one of the biggest barriers, and I say this a lot on this podcast, is capital. Capital is a major barrier for entry into the space. So with the MORE Act, that would add or give you the resources to get grants and funding to help you get past that barrier of entry. Federal taxation on cannabis. The MORE Act also proposes to introduce a federal excise tax on cannabis products, which could support social equity programs, but it also might burden small businesses by having that excise tax, because specifically in California, before I left, that's why I left, is because I looked at the landscape as a cultivator and realized being taxed at 48%, I didn't see that as a viable business model to be sustainable. And so depending on what that federal excise tax amounts to, could be a significant burden on small businesses getting into that space. So that's the dual sides to that portion of it about the excise tax, because they're talking about using some of those taxes to help support social equity programs. So that's great, but the money that might be charged to those small businesses might be what's can also cause them to fail. So I think that's something that definitely she needs to look at. Again, it also depends on what the percentage of that excise tax is. Now, talking about job creation and economic growth, Harris has argued that cannabis reform could create significant job opportunities, and I agree with her on that. Just with my business alone, it has given me the opportunity to hire people to work for my business as well, which if I didn't have that cannabis business, I wouldn't be able to provide those kind of jobs there. So And it also gives me the opportunity to offer jobs to people that might not have the opportunity at other jobs because of the type of work that it requires. So, and with that, I believe that with some federal cannabis reform, that it would also improve bank access, and that is very important. Um, because that's a major hurdle for small businesses and cannabis businesses in particular, because of the lack of institutions that they can bank with. So now let's go to Donald Trump's economic policies in cannabis. Um, Limited direct support for cannabis businesses. Trump left cannabis regulations mostly up to the states. So that's why we have a lot of these. I won't say that's why we have a lot of these, but his intent was to have kind of the pattern that we have now. New Mexico has its own rules and regulations. California has its own rules and regulations. Arizona has its own rules and regulations. I don't think that as being as beneficial as a federal rule and regulations across the board. One is I believe it will help with increased quality control by having that set standard, similar like we have with our food. There's no New Mexico food standard versus California food standard. No, it's the Federal Drug Administration or the FDA or USDA for agriculture. It's across the board, across all the states. Now they do take regional things into play, but the major aspects of it, like keeping the food safe, is across the board, and I think that should be something that needs to be applied as well in the cannabis space. And so, and he also did not support federal protections for cannabis businesses. Those federal protections are needed and important. Um, the impact of the 2018 Farm Bill. This legalized hemp, which allowed me to get my farm in Berlin and to start legally growing hemp for production, starting my business. And that also created opportunities in the CBD market. But it does not address THC. So, yes, it did help in the space for a cannabis user, I mean, for hemp producers, but it did not help for cannabis providers. And also, that bill did have a lot of issues with hemp that has hindered the hemp space, such as the 0.3% of THC limit. If your product is determined hot, that you have to destroy the whole crop or the whole field that was housed instead of just the plants that were determined hot. Those are the things that I think did really hinder, specifically New Mexico hemp farmers out here. It didn't bother me because none of my products came out, or none of my fields came out hot, but I do know a couple of farmers that had to stop cultivating hemp because of the results of their products becoming hot, destroying it, and the cost that incurred on their businesses. Um, Job creation and economic stimulation. The Trump administration did not actively promote the cannabis industry as an economic driver, like Vice President Harris is talking about, which I think was a missed opportunity. I think that he really could have leaned into that and potentially provided a lot more independence to sway to his side. So I think that was a missed opportunity on that aspect as well. But so based on those two sections of that aspect, to me, it just shows that Harris's policies are a little bit more rooted in creating opportunities for small businesses and prioritizing social equity, which to me makes sense based off of her character of coming from a middle class family, understanding that the middle class is a driver for economics in the U.S. and that by creating opportunities for small businesses, you're going to be able to expand that middle class section. And then also by prioritizing social equity, you're also giving the lower section of this population and the most impacted by the war on drugs the opportunities to really prosper in this space, which we know is a generating capital or generating industry. And then we also know that Trump approach is more hands off. which is aligned with the Republican view of big business or government staying out of people's spaces and allowing the states to really lead on that and not providing federal support. So if you're leaning that way, then that makes sense. But what I will say into that, when you look at both of those comparisons, um, if you're an entrepreneur trying to get into the space, I don't see how that would necessarily propel you if you voted for Trump. Um, and again, that's my personal opinion. Please leave in the comments what you think on that regard. And I want to make it very, very clear. I'm not crazily happy about Harris, specifically because of her views and stance on Gaza. Um, and I am definitely not for Trump because, from my vantage point, he is not for me. As a black man, yeah, I don't, based on the rhetoric, the policies that he's enacted, I don't see how he would be a benefit to me. But again, that's my personal opinion. But I do want to get, now that we kind of went through that, I gave my opinions, I gave you how I think each of these candidates can potentially affect the cannabis industry. I just want to kind of wrap that up succinctly for you guys. As I stated, each candidate has their pros and cons in some spaces and in others. There's no perfect candidate for the cannabis space in this space right now. To be quite honest with you, but Harris's record and future plans may appeal to people like me whose priorities are social equity and resources for the BIPOC community and entrepreneurs. And Trump's approach may seem more favorable to those that prefer minimal federal intervention. So that's how I see each of these candidates in this space. And like I stated, which candidate I believe will be more beneficial for my audience and the people that look like me and that are trying to do the things that I'm doing. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And to me, policies really matter, especially in an industry like cannabis, because policies have the potential to make this industry or break it. Or to allow it to end up like a lot of other industries where the only people that are really benefiting from it are rich white men. And if that's something we don't want to see, then I really think we need to take these policies seriously, really research into them, and like I've been saying throughout this entire podcast, fact check me. I encourage you to fact check me. Do your own research and make your own informed decisions. Like I said, I'm not an expert in policies. I'm not an expert in government. That's not my wheelhouse. I feel like I'm knowledgeable about it, but that's not my expertise. Cultivation, yes, that I'm an expert in. That's my expertise. I feel confident in providing information on that. But like I said, I did my research on this particular topic, and so I believe I presented you with as many facts as you can to determine what would be best for you. But at the end of the day, vote. Voting matters. It's really important. Like I said, so get an informed decision that you like, and then my philosophy would be vote on policies that they're going to enact, as well as the candidate as a person. The president should be, at the bare minimum, from my perspective, the president should at least be somebody that you would be willing to let watch your kids. Because if you can't let them watch your kids, why would you let them run the country? That's important. So character is really important, and I'll let you be the judge of that. But I kind of been rambling on a little bit here, so I just want to wrap up today's episode and let you know, thank you all for tuning in to another Free the Plant, Free the Podcast, Free the Plant, Free the People, presented by BluRok Farm. And always, we have that partnership with LeafWell. So if you need $10 off your medical cannabis card, go to BluRok Farm, go to leafwell.com and use the code BluRokFarm10. And for my New Mexico residents, use BluRok10 is the code to get so you're $75. And then stay informed, stay engaged, and as always, keep pushing for change in the cannabis community that you want to see. So subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode. We really, really appreciate it. Leave a comment, let us know what guests we should have on, who you're going to vote for, what policies you're worried about, what policies you want to see enacted. And then, until next time, this is LeVar with Free the Plant, Free the People, and we out.